Before the deerstalker cap and the logic of Baker Street, Arthur Conan Doyle's mind was drawn to the freezing, pitch-black fog of the Atlantic. In 1872, an American merchant brig called the Mary Celeste was found drifting aimlessly. Below deck, the ship was in perfect order. Its cargo was entirely undisturbed. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, and no damage to the hull. Yet the 10 people on board had simply disappeared, leaving behind an empty vessel and a maritime mystery that provided no rational answers. While his own family struggled to hold together a squalid flat in Edinburgh, Arthur stared at the newspaper reports of the ghost ship. His mother didn't offer him comfort. She offered him the riddle, telling him, "As for what happened, you tell me." The mystery of the sea was soon eclipsed by a vanishing closer to home. Arthur's childhood was defined by a crowded, failing flat and a father sinking into the depths of a bottle. The reality of the unknown arrived one night before dawn. From his bedroom window, a 13-year-old Arthur watched mysterious, shadow-cloaked figures force his father out of the house and into the darkness. It was the last time he would see his father in their home. The aftermath was a collection of silent evidence: scuff marks on the floorboards, hidden past-due bills, and an empty chair at breakfast. Sent away to school on his uncle's charity, Arthur began to seek out a world of cause and consequence. In his notebooks, he started to build a kingdom where questions, even those about ghost ships and missing fathers, finally had to yield an answer. In 1876, Arthur entered the University of Edinburgh. He traded the uncertainty of his youth for the precise, exhaustive study of medicine, hoping that the rigors of anatomy could explain the world. It was here he encountered Dr. Joseph Bell. Working as Bell's outpatient clerk, Arthur watched the surgeon navigate the crowded operating theater, performing rapid-fire assessments that relied on a total mastery of physical evidence. This diagram illustrates a typical Bell assessment. Without a single interview, Bell identified silver poisoning in a factory worker by isolating specific anomalies: metallic dust clinging to his boot cuffs and a faint rhythmic tremor in his left hand. Bell moved past surface symptoms. He pointed Arthur toward a gray-blue discoloration deep beneath the worker's nail bed, a sign of argyria. He taught the student to rule out frostbite or burns by observing how the chemical had imprinted itself on the bloodstream. Bell's final instruction was the pivot point for Arthur's education: the necessity of distinguishing between the act of seeing and the discipline of observing. Seeking to apply these lessons in the field, Arthur signed on as a surgeon aboard the whaling ship Hope. By April 1880, he was at the edge of the Arctic Circle, watching the wooden hull splinter through miles of pack ice. The Arctic was a lesson in visceral survival. Arthur spent months dodging charging bears and working alongside men like Cyrus, a crewman who carried a suitcase filled with accounts of unsolved American murders and seemed to relish the violence of the hunt. When he returned to England, Arthur attempted a medical partnership in Plymouth with a former classmate, Dr. George Budd. But within the walls of their practice, the logic of medicine began to warp. George Budd was manic and increasingly paranoid. The partnership ended when Arthur awoke in the middle of the night to find a deadly swamp adder being dropped through his bedroom ceiling vent, a calculated attempt on his life by the man he shared a practice with. Surviving the Arctic and the malice of George Budd left Arthur with a stark realization. The predators of the ice were simple. The hidden, shifting motives of a civilized man were far more dangerous. By 1882, Arthur was struggling to survive in a derelict practice in Southsea. He lived on bread and margarine, waiting for patients who rarely appeared at his door. In the isolation of his clinic, the old maritime enigmas and the memory of his father's vanishing began to bleed together. He was a doctor who could diagnose a disease, but he still couldn't diagnose the tragedies of his own past. He turned to the page to impose order. He channeled his fascination with the Mary Celeste and the symptoms of human behavior into a story called J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. It was eventually accepted for publication by Cornhill magazine. Writing provided the only space where logic could resolve tragedy. On paper, the vanishing of a crew or a father wasn't a permanent void. It was a problem that could be dismantled and solved. Success brought Arthur into the elite literary circles of London. He was no longer a starving surgeon. He was a contemporary of men like Robert Louis Stevenson, entering a world where intellect was the primary currency. At a Gothic séance, he met Harry Houdini. The magician, a master of illusion himself, immediately sensed the psychological weight Arthur carried, noting the deep-seated curiosity of a man who had lost too much to the shadows. Houdini saw a man who existed between two worlds, one of cold surgical reason and another haunted by the unexplained. It was this specific tension that prepared Arthur to create a new kind of hero. Outside the dining halls, the fog of the 1880s was thickening. London was becoming a landscape of increasingly complex crimes, and its streets were waiting for a mind capable of tracing them back to their source. The boy who watched his father disappear into the night was now the man who could explain why. Arthur Conan Doyle had found his voice, creating Sherlock Holmes just in time to face the escalating violence of the London fog.